All right. Well, welcome to the first author panel for the Journal of Library Outreach and Engagement. This will be for the volume 2, number 1. So my name is María Emerson. I am the Student Success Librarian at the University of Illinois. I'm also one of the co-editors for this journal. I'm joined today with Sarah Christensen and Matthew Roberts, who are also our co-editors. So to start with, I think we'll just, go through the panelists, and if they have they can talk about the research that they did and the process that went along with it. And then that will give us a chance for the participants to also ask any questions that they may have. And we can also talk about any challenges and benefits that may have come with this process as well. So I think we can start. I'm just gonna pick on people. We'll start with John Jackson. He wrote the Apples and Oranges, an indicator for assessing the relevant impact of library events. So John, if you just want to get started, and we can go from there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. So my name is John Jackson. I'm engagement for William H. Hannon Library at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. And I want to start giving a shout out to my co-authors who I'm here on behalf of Ray Andrade, Rhonda Rosen, and Carol Raby. So the four of us, we're the outreach team for our library. And we put together this project. And there's now some beeping going on in the background, so I apologize if you can hear that. But anyway, so our project was, we just wanted to find a way to assess holistically our outreach programming. I mean, there's tons of literature on outreach assessment, and there's lots of different examples, but there's not really, at least that we could find, a good model for looking at an entire program of outreach, like all the events that we do, and making some decisions about that, like what programs are quote unquote the best, or what programs are quote unquote the most engaging. So that's why we did this project. We wanted to be able to prioritize our resources and staffing, and so this provided one potential model for measuring one event against another. For example, how do you measure engagement at a lecture about neuroimaging versus therapy dogs at finals? Those are two totally different events. But, especially in situations like we've had in the last 2 years where resources have been cut, and we've had to make decisions about which programs to keep and which ones to not, how do you measure those? So hence the apples and oranges in the title of our article. So our method was pretty simple. We basically just used a binary code for whether or not engagement was present or whether it was not. So we used the same feedback forms at all of our events. So we looked at 4 years worth of events, which turned out to be 44 individual events, and 844 feedback forms. We used the same feedback form in all of our events, or most of our events. And in those feedback forms, we ask 3 questions. Why did you attend today's event? What did you learn? Was there anything that surprised you? And then we coded the responses for all of those feedback forms, all 884 of them, and tried to determine, is there evidence of engagement? And we define that as a change in attitude, behavior, or knowledge. Is there evidence of engagement in this response from our attendee? Using that binary code, we could figure out 50% of the attendees had evidence of engagement in their feedback forms. And then we sort of crossed that with kind of what we called a confidence level, which was how many people filled out the feedback form. So if half the attendees filled out the feedback forms, that was a confidence level. I'm using that very loosely, a confidence level of 50%. And then if 60% of those feedback forms showed evidence of engagement, then we said that engagement was 60%. So having those two factors allowed us to plot all of our events onto an XY axis, which then gives us a visualization of all of our programming, all 44 programs. And it gave us something to reflect upon. And that really then is part 2 of the work that we did, was a reflection exercise. So the 4 of us, after we had normed our rubric, done the assessment, looked at the data, we then met twice and had just kind of an open discussion about, what does this mean to us? What sort of trends, again, not from a statistical point of view, but from a sort of visual cognitive point of view, what trends do we notice in this visualization? And we learned some pretty interesting things, which I can talk about later, but in the interest of time, I can stop there because that's the basic overview of what our research was.
Great, thanks, John. We'll move on to the other articles and then we can go back to like what are some benefits and challenges of this. I guess we can go next with Noah. So Noah Lenstra, co-authored with Martha McGehee, public librarians and public health. How do partners perceive them? So Noah, if you want to give an overview of your article.
Yeah, and like John, I'm also here on behalf of my co-author Martha McGehee. And so, yeah, just to give a brief overview. So this is part of a much larger project that I've been doing since 2010, really looking at kind of what are some of the ways that public librarians are engaging in community partnerships. We know that a lot of the services that public librarians do increasingly come out of multi-sector work with kind of digital coalitions and yeah, involvement in chambers of commerce, Rotary, partnerships for children, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things, just to kind of give take one step back, our process was first to interview librarians from these 18 communities, and then librarians identified for us some of the key partners that they've worked with. And then we interviewed the partners that they've worked with. And so this article really looks at kind of library partnerships from the partners perspective. And so it's kind of a distillation of 59 interviews we did with library partners via Zoom during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think some of the findings may be really relevant not only for public libraries, but also for just kind of a pulse check on kind of how are we as librarians kind of perceived in terms of kind of, are we seen just as service providers? Are we seen as individuals who have a lot of expertise that should be kind of incorporated into strategic planning? What is the profile of librarians in communities? And so that's kind of at the highest level what this study kind of set out to find. And what we found is that really three things. In the best cases, librarians are seen as trusted connectors, able to make connections not only with information, but also with different institutions. Like they're able to be that entity that connects different institutions together. They're often, in the best of cases, seen as community experts. And they're often, in the best of cases, seen as entities that have shared goals with other entities in the community. But then there can be a lot of weaknesses as well. So sometimes partnerships are very dependent upon a particular staff member, and when that staff member leaves, the partnership can collapse. One of the most interesting ones is that we heard in a lot of the interviews people talking about how the partnership was kind of seen as aberrant. So it was kind of an interesting thing. Like people thought like, oh, I work a lot with my library, but that's my library. It couldn't possibly be like that all across the country. So it was really even when they were like, and we had this quote that we included in the article about. Let me see. But yeah, just I can come back to it. I should have had this ready. But yeah, just seeing it's kind of aberrant. And so we talk about kind of when we're planning for community engagement, to really attending to how the library is perceived in the community, because I think that really has a lot to do with not only our ability to work collaboratively with others. It ultimately has a lot to do with the sustainability of a library as an institution, especially in this time of kind of increasing library trauma and vocational awe. and concerns about book banning. I think if we're not attending to how we're perceived by others, we're not setting ourselves up for success as an institution.
Thanks, Noah. Next we can have Kristen speak. Kristen co-authored Notes from the Pandemic Field Challenge or Opportunity with Bethany Dietrich. So Kristen, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Kristen Hindes. I'm the Associate Director for Research and Instruction at St. Michael's College in Vermont. And I co-authored an article with a woman named Beth Dietrich, who is at Champaign College, which is about 5 or 6 miles away from where I'm sitting now. And she and I had been colleagues here at St. Mike's. And then shortly after she got her job at Champlain, she reached out to me about collaborating on a program. It starts with the Vermont Humanities Council. Each year, the Vermont Humanities Council picks a book called for a Vermont Reads program, and they ask communities to collaborate on events around that book. And in January of 2020, so a pre-pandemic time, they had chosen, the Vermont Humanities Council had chosen Angie Thomas's The Hate U Give, and which is about the story of a young woman named Star Carter and her experience in the aftermath of witnessing a police shooting of her childhood friend. So it's a young adult novel. And Beth wanted to collaborate on some programming around that book. She was able to apply to the Vermont Humanities Council to obtain 75 copies of the book, which we shared between the 2 institutions. And we started talking about how different programming that we could, or different events that we could plan. One of which we decided to do collaboratively was to do a film screening of the film by the same name, The Hate U Give, and then do some discussion around that. And then, of course, not so long after, the pandemic came to pass, or was born, and we needed to make some changes around that. So part of the structure at St. Michael's College, I'm part of a committee for, with the education department. They do something called the Common Read every year with their education students, and they open up the events to that campus-wide. And so as a member of that committee, I was kind of the point person for collaborating on this film discussion. So, you know, at the time, Zoom and breakout rooms was somewhat new to us. We had a little bit of a learning curve in terms of getting students, faculty and staff on board for this. We spent a lot of time getting or having our institutions have separate access to the film. So we weren't going to be watching the film together. Participants were asked to watch the film ahead of time. So they had access to that through streaming video from their home institutions. And then we had students register, and we really found out that the benefit of kind of losing control was gaining control in terms of the group discussions and their makeup. So we could control the number of students per discussion group. And then we had a number of facilitators. So we had that were faculty and staff from both institutions. So we had 25 facilitators. Some of them got doubled up in groups. And then we also created some affinity spaces for students who identified as Black, and also for students who identified as Indigenous people of color. So recognizing that the experience of taking in this film or this book could land differently with people. And so we wanted to provide spaces for them to discuss it. And participants did get to choose the discussion place that they wanted to be. So if they wanted to be in an affinity space, they could choose that when they registered. And if they wanted to be in a more open-ended or non-affinity space necessarily discussion, they could choose that as well. So we had about 150 participants, about 90 from St. Mike's and about 60 or so from Champlain. And it was very much a success. It was a lot of behind the scenes work. But it definitely felt like, you know, even during a time when we were staying apart, it was really a wonderful way to come together.
Thank you. We were supposed to have Kelly McElroy and Robin Weiss with us today to talk about their article Distance Engagement during COVID-19 through postcard initiatives. Neither of them were able to make it, unfortunately, but if you're able to, definitely read their article. It's pretty fascinating. We can talk a bit about any challenges or benefits you experienced with your projects. You can also, because you all co-authored your articles, talk about any benefits or challenges that happen when you author an article with someone. So I'll just leave that up to you to jump in whenever you want.
I'm happy to answer that first since I was just speaking. I actually, this isn't the first article that I've written with another person, although it was the first one that I've written with Beth. I definitely love the collaborative, or what can be a collaborative effort in writing something together. And we had a lot of cheerleaders kind of helping us along and reading some drafts. And it was really kind of a bonding experience, even though we had been coworkers before and we're no longer working at the same institution. It was a nice way to kind of further our professional relationship. There's a couple of other events that our schools do together, just professionally with the research and instruction librarians. Every year we get together just to kind of discuss and debrief and talk about our hopes and dreams for reference and instruction in the coming year. And so I think those things can only be strengthened by activities like co-authoring. So obviously we work well together. And then some of the problems that came up, certainly just facility around the technology. You don't want to be kind of bumbling around in something that's new when you're holding space for 150 people. And at one point, so I was on campus during the event with another faculty member in one of our instruction classrooms, and I felt like the wizard behind the curtain, because we were kind of managing people in breakout rooms. We were managing what was going in the chat for people to, have access to some resources or access to questions. We were managing, we kind of had come up with a script, and so who was taking on the screen and who was speaking and could they be heard and all of those things. And so it felt a little bit like juggling. And definitely we had created a guide, or what I called a script, so that for all of the facilitators, so that everyone knew what was happening next. And so they felt confident and comfortable, not only moving from the keynote address where Dr. Margaret Bass kind of set the scene for us, but then moving on to their discussion groups so they knew what was going to happen. So that script felt like maintaining or grabbing control of the situation, but it brought everyone in so that at least the facilitators knew what was going to happen next. So I'm not sure that could have happened necessarily had we been in person. We certainly wouldn't have had as tight control over who was in a discussion group necessarily. And we wouldn't have been able to provide, 16 different spaces for people to break out into different areas. So I do feel like it worked out well, despite the fact that we couldn't view the film together at the same time. And, despite the fact that we were not physically together.
Sarah, you have your hand raised.
I do. I'm trying to have my best Zoom manners here. I just had kind of a related question, and that's what do you look for in a co-author? Is it just your colleagues who happen to be working on the same types of projects, or do you seek out co-authors based on like, hey, this person's really great at qualitative coding, or this person really knows statistics, or like, hey, they're really organized and they're going to keep me on track. Are there any, attributes, or is it just sort of by chance because they're working on the same projects?
I'm happy to answer that. For me, it's certainly familiarity. The other thing that I've co-authored recently was with a faculty member in our education department, and we wrote a conference proposal for an activity at a conference which we didn't get accepted. So we parlayed our work into an article that's going to be published in November in Book Links. So she and I both teach children's literature, and the article we wrote was based on that. It's a text set essentially about lighthouses. And so certainly familiarity, not only because we know each other and teach the same course, but also because obviously we have the same interests. So that's been my experience. Yeah, I would say that is definitely helpful. I also think that that familiarity allows you to know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and so how you fit together kind of as a puzzle piece and what you can both bring to the table. So certainly I think that plays into it as well.
And I can jump in here and say, totally agree with everything Kristen said, especially the last part about puzzle pieces. The one thing that I learned the hard way many years ago was that if you don't define in advance what everyone is doing, someone might jump in and decide to change the game midstream, and that can be really frustrating for the rest of us. I think almost all of the articles I've written in the last 5 years have been co-authored, and they've all been very good experiences. And the ones that have been the best have been the ones where we sat down before we started the project and said, okay, you're going to be the lead writer, you're going to be the lead editor, you're going to crunch the data, and sort of figuring out who's doing, or at least who's the lead on each section of the project. That makes such a difference in just making sure people know who's responsible for what.
Yeah, and I guess I can also just jump in, and I would agree with what John and Kristen said. And I guess I'm kind of thinking about this topic from a somewhat orthogonal perspective. Kind of one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about in this project is kind of the conundrum of when you're doing kind of multi-sector work. We have our outlets are kind of professional in nature, so thinking about kind of what are some opportunities for people who may be working across sector to kind of publish and co-author across the disparate sectors that they represent, and some of the challenges they're in. So for instance, last week was the National Recreation and Park Association conference, and I wasn't able to attend, but they had a number of sessions on collaborations between public libraries on parks and recreation agencies in Arizona and Philadelphia and Arlington, Virginia. But it's great that those folks in Parks and Recreation got that kind of session. But what would it really look like to cultivate kind of channels for kind of sharing not only amongst ourselves, but with those that we often work with or seek to work with?
Yeah, that's a great point. There was another article, I think the Suko article in this issue, that had like probably 10 authors on it from all across fields and disciplines, and another one in the last issue as well. So it's great to see some of that, and I wish Kelly and Robin were able to join, because Robin's actually a student assistant, and it seemed like more of a mentor-mentee relationship that they had, and I would be interested to hear their perspectives on working together in that. But yeah, that was great. Thank you all.
Yeah, well, John, I actually had a question for you. I don't know what the format is, and apologies if I'm disrupting it, but I think your kind of topic of assessment and kind of using that for reflection, I thought was really captivating. And yeah, I wonder if you looked at things like project outcome, which I guess has now recently been embraced by ACRL, or yeah, did you use any of these kind of program toolkits that are out there, or did you kind of develop something from scratch in-house based on your kind of unique needs and constraints?
Yeah, ours was built in-house, and we wanted it to be quick and easy. And so we had initially tried to come up with some sort of index for measuring or quantifying all of our programs. Something like, I don't know if you're familiar with like the happiness index, that measures the level of happiness in different countries. But our math skills are not to that level. So we needed something that we could use that was a little bit faster. And after talking with another person who is more familiar with statistics than we were, they were like, just use a binary scale. Like, don't worry about using a Likert scale, because then you have to get into regression analysis, which I think that would actually be the next natural step for this type of project is a more robust regression analysis of the data. But it's like, if you're just trying to figure out like which events are the most engaging, use a simple yes, no binary, figure out how you're going to actually measure that. Like, what does engagement look like? That is a trickier question. But using the binary scale makes it very easy. And then we can use that pretty much for any event. All you have to do is figure out, okay, how are we measuring engagement at this event? And then just say, okay, I see evidence of engagement in X percentage of the attendees. And that way you can compare one event against another. But yeah, we do recognize that there's more robust models out there, but this was one that we wanted to sort of use with the data that we already had. That was the other thing, is we had 4 years worth of data using the exact same survey instrument, and we wanted to be able to use that data in some way. So this was a way for us to work with what we had. Yeah, I got a question for you, Noah, though. So in our study, like once we saw the data, like there were some things that were like immediately apparent to us, and we made some immediate changes. I imagine maybe the same might be said of your project. Were there any sort of things that sort of jumped out at you and you're like, we got to change this right now, or we got to do this differently?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there definitely were some changes, and not so much, I would say, in kind of methodological changes, but more in terms of approach. So just to give some context, so this project, it really began in 2019 when we applied for funding to the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So in kind of our initial funding ask, we were talking about, oh, there's been this big increase in kind of public library participation in kind of public health initiatives. Yoga and cooking classes and and we kind of said, well, we believe or we hypothesize that most of these programs come out of library participation in community partnerships. And then they were. And that's partly. We looked at 4 communities where there was evidence of strong partnerships before. But anyway, where the shift really came is when we really got into doing the interviews and listening to what librarians were saying and what their partners were saying. We shifted from kind of an outcomes-based perspective into a process-based perspective. And what I mean by that is that we really started to become much more attuned or interested in the processes of partnerships rather than where those partnerships lead. And I think there's even a fundamental grammar to working collaboratively, and kind of our, I guess, hypothesis for the next step is this kind of language of community partnerships could be used for any community goal. If you're trying to increase access to technology or address the digital divide or support local entrepreneurship or address reading disparities, anything that you're trying to do collaboratively requires a lot of the same type of work. So, but yeah, that was kind of the main shift. I think was really shifting from kind of the outcomes of partnerships to trying to really dive deep into what it actually looks like for librarians to be working collaboratively with other entities, often for multiple years at a time, and really studying that process. But yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. You can go ahead. I have a question, but it can wait.
Well, I was just going to pass the ball to Kristen really quickly. So I was thinking, I mean, one thing that I think just on that kind of fundamental grammar of partnerships, I think, yeah, kind of librarians working collaboratively amongst themselves, kind of as you did in Vermont, can be a great way to kind of hone those skills. I think so. I'd love to hear if you have any reflections on kind of the process of collaborating with other librarians, how that may or may not be different from any experiences you may have had working with non-librarians on any initiatives.
Yeah, good question. I feel like when you collaborate with other librarians, you already speak the same language. So there's certainly a facility around that. When I have collaborated with faculty on different projects, they tend to have, I mean, you still speak academia, right? You still have this academic language that you share, but their focus tends to be a little more narrow, whereas the library serves all of our students. They might serve, just the students within their own department, or if they teach maybe a gen ed course, some more beyond that. And so often I think the collaboration with faculty is more in their lane, and you're kind of merging into their lane a little bit more. That's been my experience. But I would say that, the following year, one of the benefits to the collaboration that St. Mike's did with Champaign is we opened it up even more. So the following year, we didn't partner that following year with Vermont Reads, with the Humanities Council, but we did partner with the University of Vermont as well as Champaign. And we had an author talk. So Jacqueline Woodson, who was a national honor, our National Book Award winner for Brown Girl Dreaming, came and spoke about her book Harbor Me, which is, again, as a young adult. It's actually probably a middle grade novel. And, the University of Vermont has a space where 3 institutions worth of people interested in an event like this could hold that space for people in person. And it was really a wonderful way to kind of crowdsource that financial commitment to bringing an author in. So that worked really well too.
I love that idea, and I'm just going to put this out there. USC, UCLA, if you're listening, we'd love to collaborate with you. You're just down the road.
So the question I have is, I've had experience with this, I'm sure you've had too, is that sometimes when you're working on projects, it starts another project, right? You learn something from it and you want to take it in another direction. With your work on these articles, or maybe a different project, is there any work you're doing now or that is coming up that you want to share with others? Or are you kind of still focusing on what you've been working on in the past?
I'll jump in. I'll be honest, this was kind of our pandemic project. It was kind of seen as I won't say a one-off, but it was something to kind of occupy our time and keep us distracted from everything else that was going on in the world. And so doing the project, because this was all done 2020 through 2021, was kind of therapeutic for us. It was a way for us to stay connected, because again, it was me and my team, was all the people in my department. It was a way for us to stay connected, to talk about something that wasn't, necessarily the frustrations or the challenges that we were dealing with in light of working from home and learning from home and all that. And so I think when we finished the project, it was kind of a door for us that is now closed. Obviously, we're going to continue assessing our events, and now that we have this metric, we can continue to use it to assess our events in the future. But we've already, all 4 of us have started talking about different projects that are completely in a different lane from this one. So I mean, maybe we'll come back to it, but I think at least for our article, this was sort of the culmination of the work in this area for us.
Yeah, I would agree to a certain extent. We did have that book, we opened it up to that 3rd institution that following year, but this year we've actually not really gone our separate ways, but decided to do some planning around a little differently. So for the common read for our education department students at St. Mike's, This was the 10th anniversary, so we decided to do a retrospective. And part of the retrospective is doing a community mural on the side of one of our buildings, which doesn't have anything obviously to do with Champaign or UVM. And so, we're doing a big mural, and then we're also doing a panel of educators primarily looking at exploring the profound significance of providing students with and also denying access to texts that are truly diverse. So, you know, the theme for our retrospective is finding power and joy and access to all stories. And that's the theme of the mural as well. And so because it was so centric to what we're doing on campus, there wasn't really room to bring in other institutions.
Yeah, and our kind of work has definitely continued, and I would say probably kind of the biggest spinoff that I've been thinking about is that a lot of the librarians that we worked with for this project are really interested in kind of sharing their stories, and so even though anyway, so that's kind of what I'm working on now is really kind of trying to figure out what's the way that kind of innovation in kind of a local context can kind of be most effectively shared kind of to inspire others or to incite action or to just really thinking about that power of kind of local stories, and I would say kind of the flip side of that is really thinking about this perception of librarians, because another thing that I've been thinking a lot about is that there is a lot of concern, rightly so, with kind of vocational awe and librarianship. But vocational awe can sometimes become weaponized in a really bizarre way to me, where if you stick your neck out, it gets chopped off. So if you're doing something really innovative and out of the box, people will be like, "Oh, how could you do that? Like that's beyond the pale. Like that's vocational awe in action, because you're kind of creating a precedent for all libraries to kind of do what you're doing." Whereas I think we need to somehow short circuit that logic, because it's not about librarians everywhere being expected to do all the same thing, but instead harness the power of partnerships to do things that are truly unique. And so, anyway, just thinking about some of these more theoretical questions as a result of kind of reflecting on the data.
Thank you for all those answers. Those are really interesting. Any other questions anyone has for anyone? There is a second author panel this Thursday. It's at 1 p.m. So if you're interested in learning about some others articles that were in this issue, you're more than welcome to register for that. And I'll make sure that's posted on our social media again. In the meantime, thank you so much. This was really interesting. I loved hearing about everyone's process with this, and I think it can be really helpful for other people to hear about it as well. So this will be uploaded on our YouTube channel in the probably this week, and hopefully other people will be able to view it that way as well. So I'm going to stop recording.